Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 21st, 2021 meeting of the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board. I'm Marie Bender and the chair of the Trust Board. In accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order, tonight's Trust Board meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. Parks and Trust members are all participating tonight by Zoom. Other public audience members may be listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Welcome to everybody who is on board. First order of business would be roll call, and Deb, if you would handle that, that would be super.
Thank you. Bear with me a little bit here. Actually, I'm going to ask that Elaine, if you don't mind calling the roll call.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chair Marie Bender.
Here.
Vice Chair Thomas Hildebrandt.
Here.
Secretary Craig Olson.
Here.
Trustee Lisa Anderl.
Yes, here.
Trustee Carolyn Burseth.
Here.
Trustee Hillary Ete.
Here.
Trustee Geraldine Poor.
Here.
Oh, and just, this is Lisa. I was identified as a trustee. I think I'm technically a liaison.
You are technically a liaison, but a voting member of the board.
Okay, good enough.
Thank you,
Fair
Lisa.
distinction. So trustee, before we start the business of tonight's meeting, I want to suggest a few rules, which I'm not going to get to. I mean, if you have a question or a comment, just raise your hand and get my attention. And I will do my best to make sure we sort of do things something like round robin. Let's see. So appearances tonight. Deb, do we have any public appearances tonight?
Madam Chair, we do not.
Thank you. So then we can progress to the first order of business, which is to review the minutes from our last meeting. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Does everybody, just put your hand up if you're in favor. That's everybody. Thank you very much. The next order of business is to review the draft 2020 annual report and the 2021 work plan. And let's see, that the cover to that wasn't in the package noted that it's Kim will be leading that discussion. The background is that we're doing this pursuant to ordinance, and the process is for the natural resources staff to draft based on the 2020 meeting minutes and to report on progress on the forest health plan, and then we will have a discussion and the report will be finalized by staff. With that, Kim, would you like to take over?
I'm happy to, and you just did my entire introduction, Marie, so I
Go.
dive right into it. So just to add to what Marie did provide an overview of the staff report, which was very brief and concise. The meat of what we'll discuss is actually in the draft annual report itself. Oh, and for the record, this is Kim Frappier. I'm the natural resources specialist with the city. One thing that I will just note regarding the annual report is that it will be presented to City Council on the consent calendar at the March 16th meeting, and the report will include the Trust 2021 work plan, which you will also see is an exhibit as part of the staff report. And so I can go ahead and share my screen so that we can look at the document together. Give me just a moment. And then I will be happy to take any questions suggestions, edits, or anything you want to discuss? Oh, I have so many things open on my screen right now. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
You are, okay. Okay, so I'd like to open it up for discussion. Does anyone have any questions or comments about anything in the report? I'm happy to, walk us through it if you'd like.
Kim, I had one question.
Okay.
In the volunteer section that you had, where you talked about how Earth Corps did events, but they also did outreach. I'm just curious to hear what that outreach looked like.
The outreach primarily consists of social media and direct email outreach. So it was nothing in person. It was all done via email and through the internet.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah.
I had just one suggestion that just might make this report easier for people who really are not part of the trust conversation. Is in the background section. I mean, we talk about having the forest management plan, the forest health plan, and the open space vegetation plan.
Mhm.
It's a little confusing why we have, well, without knowing what each of those three was intended to address, it's a little confusing as to why we have three things that kind of sound like the same thing. So maybe just add some sort of parenthetical that sort of describes what that particular document is intended for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it sounds like perhaps I could put in a clarifying sentence that states that the open space vegetation plan is a high-level citywide plan. I mean,
Yeah.
And I'm just going to make some notes. I'm not going to,
Yeah.
unless you have a specific sentence you'd like me to add, I'm going to.
Yeah, it's just unclear if we already had a forest management plan, why we needed an independent forest health evaluation.
Okay.
Yeah, if I put my 2 cents in, it might be worth just starting that paragraph off by saying that we're guided by 3 different plans, and then you can, pop them out individually and explain what they are, and then put your sentence about what you've done around those, after those. And that helps to clarify it. There's 3 different.
Yeah. Well, and
plans.
I also could add, the 2008 Pioneer Park Forest Health Plan was actually part of a 2008 Forest Health Survey, which then informed the amendment to the management plan.
Yeah.
So it does get very confusing.
Yeah, it gets
So
complex, doesn't it?
there's a lot of information, and but we can flesh it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing, this is probably because things get drafted at different times, but you probably want to go through the document and pick up the places where you talk about the forest health plan, define it at the first time of FHP, and then just make that work through the rest of the document.
Lisa, I see that you have a comment also.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Oh, wait, am I off mute? Yes, I am. Wow, miracle. Well, could you just either page back up or page back down to that little table about the invasive tree removal and stuff that was accomplished and the acreage that was associated with it? Yeah, there, right there. So invasive removal maintenance, ivy rings, and invasive tree treatments, and other places where we use those terms. For me, I think I know what some of those things mean, but maybe a footnote or something to say,
Mhm.
Because ivy rings to me means taking out some invasive ivy around the tree root, but I don't know if that's true or not. But then invasive tree treatments and invasive removal maintenance. I just don't have a clear understanding of what the difference is between all of those things. So maybe drop a footnote and say, this is what this entails. This is what this entails.
Mhm.
Just
What
for
yeah,
some newbie who's reading the report, it might be helpful.
That's
Yeah,
good.
I agree. That would be helpful. And interestingly enough, last year's report did have an explanation of what kind of comprehensive removal looked like. I'm wondering if we might want to have a definition section or have it at the end. 'Cause I feel like it would break the flow of the report to include it right there, but I don't know, what would you like to see?
Oh, I'm going to defer to whoever's going to put their name on this for what how it would flow. But probably typically, well, I'm a lawyer, and typically when we introduce new terms in any sort of a document, we define them right up front.
Okay.
Because defining them at the end just doesn't really help people who've read through the whole document and didn't really know what they were reading. So maybe a footnote's like too technical, but maybe just a parenthetical or something that would just clarify that what the difference is between those tasks.
Okay.
I'm sorry to jump in here, but if you wanted to sort of create something that could move from one document to the next, you could just drop a footnote here that says, see Appendix A for definitions. And then you could move Appendix A from this document to anything else you wanted to move it to.
Yeah,
That's a nice idea.
I think that would be a really nice way to keep the flow of the report, and then someone can reference that if they need to.
I agree. And then you're consistent from one report to the next annually, and nobody has to redo this work.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if maybe, Kim, you could go ahead and hyperlink it. Is that what you're thinking, Marie, to go ahead and say for further information, you can click here and then you can go ahead and click on it and it will just automatically open that document for you so that you can look at it in another browser as you read if you want to.
Yeah, the only problem with that is that assumes you're reading it online instead of on a piece of paper,
True.
which I'm going to read it on a piece of paper. Sorry, I'm old school.
That's a good point. I get it.
Oh, I would love to read it on a piece of paper if I could get my printer to work.
That is a good idea, though, Hillary. I mean, would it be overkill to do both, or do we just
Oh,
want to?
no, it wouldn't. It would be great if you did both. If, put a definition and then see more information at this hyperlink would be super.
Yeah.
I think especially seeing as we have no end in sight for when we're going to have to,
Yeah.
kind of go back to regular meetings and still do all this virtually. Maybe it would be helpful to hyperlink that as well as maybe to help clarify the reports that we were talking about before. You could hyperlink those individual reports so that if people wanted more info, they could click on them and read them.
Mhm. Okay. Great.
But overall, I think it's a great report. Unfortunately, it reflects the realities of last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think to be able to say that we got, we addressed 82 acres, I mean, that's close to a third of the park. So that's good.
Yeah, we were still able to accomplish quite a bit of work,
Mm-hmm.
just with perhaps a slightly different, in some cases, maybe a slightly different focus on tasks that we might not have done, but or we would have done eventually, but maybe not all last year.
So do you need us to approve? What do you need us to do?
So really we don't need a motion for this. It's really just discussion to help tighten the document up. And Councilmember Andrew, just to your point earlier, basically the trust is putting their name on this document to City Council, and I'm just doing the work to produce the report. So
Sure.
this just needs to embody what the trust wants to present and how they want it presented. So perhaps the next step would be for me to do the revisions and then send it to Marie for a final look All right.
Okay.
I guess that our work is done here if there are no other comments. Thank you.
So I guess we should move on to the work plan.
Yeah, and I am happy to share my screen
Okay.
on that. If you want to close out of yours, Kim.
Yes.
All right, so I took what the feedback that I received on the draft work plan at the November meeting, and I tried to reflect all of those changes in this final version of the work plan for 2021. This is the the working document for the trust, but it also, as a courtesy, gets attached to the annual report to council each year. Just so that the council is aware of the issues, topics that are coming up for the year for the trust. I would love if you've reviewed this to just get some feedback, if it looks like an accurate reflection, if there are other items that have come up in the meantime that you would like to be on this work plan, or if it looks pretty good and we can finalize it.
Geraldine? You're on mute.
Not anymore. Thanks. I wanted to discuss briefly the wording under the last March item, the letterboxing program. I know last month I suggested that we put it back on, even if it wasn't, if we didn't, to explore whether it might be possible. So I would like to suggest that in order to keep people from building expectations too high, you could word that as reaching out to letterboxing volunteers about the potential to launch a program.
Okay.
And that's the only thing I had. It looked great to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry.
Any other comments? I think we're good. Thanks, Evan. And then we have the fire management plan, which I think Eleni is going to handle for us.
I am going to. Bear with me for just 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. There we go. Sorry about that. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look over both the staff report and the updated fire management plan that was included in the packet. I hope that it was useful to see both a red line version and a clean version. I know sometimes looking at that much markup can make your eyes cross. But I wanted to just kind of quickly walk through what some of the changes were that were included in this update and talk about next steps, essentially. So I'm gonna start at the top here. So just, a little bit of background on this fire management plan. So this fire management plan was adopted in 2003 as an appendix to the Pioneer Park Forest Management Plan. This was Appendix M of many appendices, and it was a document that was drafted with the goal of guiding city departments to better protect both Pioneer Park and the surrounding neighborhood from wildland fire. And there are a lot of different components to this, but essentially it boils down to assessing the city resources for some sort of a fire response to a fire occurrence within the park, and also to identify ways that the city and the fire department could mitigate fire risk and also improve the fire response should one occur in the park. This document originally was written as a joint document between the fire chief at the time and park staff, primarily Paul West, I believe at the time. And so this was a document created by both departments to reflect, you know, accurate information about current practices and current resources. So it's pretty clear that having not been updated in over 17 years, that it was time to revisit this plan. And I think the timing is, you know, really driven a lot by what we saw last summer on the west side of the mountains. We usually associate wildland fires with, you know, historically drier areas like the east side of the mountains. But really that, you know, we started to see a lot more activity on the west side. And the Parks Department received some inquiries from the public about this, and it looked like it was time to just revisit this plan. So the first thing, so there were several updates that were made to the plan. The first crack at updates were that I gave this document to fire staff, and this was reviewed by both Fire Chief Steve Heitman and also Deputy Chief Mike Mandela. And they provided a number of just logistical updates on current mutual aid agreements that have expanded since the original drafting of the document, what actual, you know, firefighting resources they have and who they can depend upon. They also wanted to update information in the plan to reflect what they saw as the realistic hose reach into the park from surrounding hydrants, and take into account things like the terrain, which were not originally identified specifically on the map. So adding the contours to the map so that everyone has a realistic understanding of what we're looking at when we look at fire reach from these hydrants. Obviously, I wanted to add Angstrom open space into that because the management of Angstrom is now under the purview of the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board and has been for 10 years. And then we all really wanted to reevaluate, you know, what are the mitigation and the risk factors that exist there still, and have those changed significantly? Are the players that are involved in this, do they view it differently? Do they see different challenges and different things that we're doing that could mitigate fire risk in the park? One of the other things that I wanted to do, and this was partially because of the updates to the hose reach sections, I wanted to update those maps to really include all this information visually, because I think it really helps people understand, you know, when we talk about the fire reach into the park, it makes these odd little polygons right in the middle of each quadrant that really clearly illustrate where we can and cannot get access to water. But as I did say in the staff report, you know, the updates that were made by both Public Works staff as well as by Mercer Island Fire Department staff were just that. They were updates. And I did not propose any changes in this document to any sort of policies or mitigation strategies. And that's really what I would really like to bring to the trust today, is a discussion about some of the things that I have seen in this document, and Kim in reviewing this document, that we would like to address, possibly for some changes or some updates to language. But also just to hear how this plan sits with all of you, given where we are now, and whether you would like us to be doing further research on mitigation strategies for the park. So that said, unless there's sort of some comments or reactions to that, I can kind of dive into these discussion topics one by one. It's up to you.
Seems like you should go ahead.
Yeah.
All right, I'm happy to. So one of the things that I did address in the staff report was that the fire management plan does call out that Mercer Island park staff will reach out proactively in educational campaigns to surrounding neighbors. This may have been done originally when the plan was adopted, but this is out of date. We haven't done any outreach, educational outreach to parks neighbors in the last, well, it's been over a decade at least. I've been with the Parks Department longer than that. And so I think this is something that is really relatively easy to do and doesn't require a big lift of staff time or resources. I have had some conversations with the King Conservation District, and they have a wildfire and forest resiliency coordinator who is very excited about the possibility of helping to provide some of that educational outreach to neighbors. And if people are interested in more information, you know, they are happy to be a resource to folks that want to learn more. And this is partially about just their, you know, proximity to a wildland, and partially just about what they can do on their own property to reduce their own risk, right? And one of the things that called out in the report that I think should be really obvious, but we all forget because that's what we do, is that things like piles of, you know, firewood right along the park boundary maybe aren't the best idea, because they can provide a conduit if there is a fire occurrence in the park, for it to jump into private properties that border the park. So things like that, but also just considerations that we haven't always had to incorporate into our landscaping on the west side that maybe we need to start looking at a little bit more as the potential for fire risk increases. So I will take that on this year. That is on our work plan for this year. And I'm happy to provide any of those materials to the trust. I can do that. I can provide those at the next meeting, just so you understand, the next meeting or possibly the meeting after, just to let you know what sort of outreach we're doing to neighbors.
So, Ellen, how do you envision that outreach to be?
So I imagine probably that it will take the form of a mailing to any property that directly borders the park. So they actually share a boundary with the park.
Right.
I think that's probably the most efficient way to do it, and probably the best way to actually reach people, you know, even as opposed to things like door hangers. Door knocking is not acceptable during COVID, so we're not going to do that. So I think probably we'll go with mailings.
Because what I'm thinking is it's not only Pioneer Park that actually has wild spaces adjacent to homes. So I'm wondering whether it's appropriate to have this be something on the city website.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could be, because I'm a little, I tell you from a risk management perspective, telling the people around Pioneer Park, but not telling the people, say, along 52nd, probably not a great risk assessment for the city. But if we put something on the website and made it available to everybody, I would like that.
Okay. Yep.
I support that.
Sorry, Tom.
Oh, I support that idea. I am starting to look at my own yard and thinking how much of a fire hazard it is. So having general awareness across the city of wildfire risk would be really good.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that. All right, so there's any other discussion on educational campaign, or else I'm gonna move right along here. So the next one up is a very specific call out to Mercer Island parks to work on park patrols. So making sure that they're actually patrolling the park, looking for encampments, or, as you know, more common in Pioneer Park is areas where people are partying, honestly, rather than encampments. But this is something that we already do in the course of our work, right? In terms of just being in the park between contractors that are in the park, right? They're covering a lot of ground, particularly during the summer. And then also our in-house seasonal crew that's both working on trails and restoration. One of the things that the trails crew does during the summer is they actually just follow social trails into some of these areas that are really far off trail just to see what's going on, right? We want to find out at the end of this trail, is there a mess at the end? Is there garbage at the end? But certainly this is just something we do in the course of our work anyway. So this doesn't represent any sort of change to operations. One of the next thing that I have on here is neighbor partnerships. So there is a section of the document. It is the vegetation management section that very specifically calls for park staff to foster partnerships with neighboring property owners in order to get some of the work done in the actual park. What I would like to do is I would like to propose some revisions to that section of the document that maybe provides a little more clarity on the roles there and the initiation of that process. And the reason I say that is because we, along the boundaries of Pioneer Parks, we have dealt for many years with encroachments into the park. So people's yards sort of getting bigger, right? And taking over a little bit of the park. And my concern here is that if what the document says is, you know, we're sort of giving park neighbors permission to go in and do a lot of pruning in the park, and really changing the landscape in the park. And while it does say in partnership with the city, I'm a little concerned about that being a gray area where we could move into different ideas of what that looks like, or what's permissible in the park. So I would propose that, that we work a little bit on cleaning up this language to talk about what these types of relationships would entail, and that the expectation isn't that park staff will be proactively fostering these relationships with every single park's neighbor, because that represents potentially just an enormous amount of time and resources to support that, which would inordinately fall on Kim, you know, and forest stewardship. And I'm a little concerned about, you know, about that becoming just an enormous workload issue. But certainly I want to make clear that we are very open to those partnerships. If we are approached by a neighbor, and I suspect we will be if we are doing educational campaigns, we will get some interest in this from neighbors, and that's fine. I think we will absolutely be responsive to those and work with those neighbors as much as they want us to, and for us to help support them. But I do think it needs to be a conversation that is largely driven by the parks, you know, so that making sure that any changes that are done in the park are really done in accordance with all of the policies and procedures that are set out within the forest management plan for the park. My fear being that, you know, someone interprets it as sort of permission to cut down lots of things and leave bare ground, where that may be not what we're, you know, what our management strategy for these areas looks like. So that would be one sort of staff proposal of a potential update to this plan that goes beyond just logistics updates, but actually a slight change in what the plan puts forward. So I welcome discussion on that.
Yeah, I would say if you have general educational materials for how people maintain their own yards on the city website, then that sets a fairly clear boundary on what is expected of individual property owners. And then one way of couching this might be to say that if neighbors of the parks have concerns about the fire safety within the boundaries of the park, that they should contact the park staff, and then if they volunteer to help with cleanup, then it puts you in charge of the situation.
Right, right. No, I think that would be a great way to foster these relationships that would, I think, like you said, lay out those boundaries pretty clearly.
Elaine, is there any way that we could help mitigate that workload issue and as board members assist or facilitate if you guys put us through some kind of training to then be able to talk to people on your behalf, or would that not be, or would that just create more work for you, you think?
That's a good thought. I think that I would want to think through that a little bit more and what that could look like. But, you know, I think, you know, deputizing, you know, board, you know, trustees and board members to be able to, at the very least, have those conversations about the goals and finding that balance between the ecological health of the park and mitigating fire risk. You know, it may not even necessarily be the technical sort of side of things, but I mean, certainly I think we should be thinking about that. And I really appreciate that you're interested in that. So.
Oh, absolutely. Let me know.
Okay.
I mean, we could certainly collect information. And, you know, this sort of brings up something too. I think on the educational campaign, I am sure there are things that are said in those pamphlets that are not consistent with how we manage the park. They reflect how you manage your own backyard, which is not a natural environment. So maybe when we sort of do here's our educational materials, we should include something that says, hey, by the way, managing the park is different from managing your backyard. And that's another way of encouraging people to have a conversation.
Right, right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think with any educational materials that we sent out, there would be a cover letter,
Yeah.
basically, you know, kind of talking about why we're doing this and then really defining those roles. So yeah, that's great.
And Elaine, I wanted to comment that this reminds me of the outreach you as staff had done a while ago, reaching out to the adjacent owners regarding the social trails.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Seems like that dialogue has been started with many of the folks adjacent property.
Right. And I think, you know, I think a lot of our, you know, just for those of you who maybe haven't been with the trust quite as long, you know, there has been, I would say, a lot of really active communication, particularly with the neighbors along the north boundary of the northwest quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
Partially because of the proximity to the trail and how popular that particular quadrant is. But, you know, I think where this will be really useful also is being in touch with the neighbors, particularly on the northeast quadrant, the north boundary of the northeast quadrant, because they aren't sort of as in touch, and there is more forested area even off of Park's property there. There's a fairly large ravine that is privately held in the northeast corner of the northeast quadrant. And so I think it will be really helpful to be in touch with all of those neighbors because they all have slightly different concerns, right? Some people's houses are right off the property boundary and some of them are quite a ways away.
Well, which also reminds me that, I mean, we do have a tree ordinance and we have ordinances about vegetation removal, especially in particularly difficult terrain. So that's just another thing to throw in there.
No, absolutely. And I will want to work with our CPD to our permitting folks to just make sure that, you know, the wording that we're including is very clear about our critical areas and our, you know, our tree permits and all of that. So certainly we will want to acknowledge that people can't just go out willy-nilly cutting down all the trees to mitigate fire risk. So, yes, good point. All right. Anything else on this topic? Are you, I'd love to just get some, you know, direction, or is everyone okay with me working on this and bringing something back to the trust on this particular part?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, one So we have removal of logs and branches adjacent to boundaries. You know, a while ago, we went to the trouble of placing logs and branches on the boundaries to protect against social trails. Maybe there needs to be some weaving together of those two thoughts.
Yeah, so this was the next thing that I wanted to address, because the plan does say, and it's really only one sentence, it's in that same paragraph, but it does say that parks will remove branches and logs in these boundary areas when trees are removed, essentially. So, wish I had a copy printed out in front of me so I could read you the exact language. But, you know, I think this warrants more attention, because it needs, if this is going to be a part of the plan, it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more for a lot of reasons. One is that there's a difference between logs and branches and what sort of risk they pose to adjacent properties, or to fire risk in general. You know, in my conversations with this coordinator from King Conservation District, he was really clear that his priority is never to remove coarse woody debris, partially because it's so vital to ecological health, but more so that it, to him, is not the source of fire risk. These tend to be very difficult to burn. They tend to really retain a lot of moisture. And usually when you see them, they look a little bit like this, which is that they're covered with moss and ferns, which isn't to say it's impossible. It's just to say that this isn't the primary concern where fire risk is involved. So I would like to look at this a little bit more, do a little more research on this before we're really recommending, hey, we got to get rid of all the logs along boundaries. The other thing about this is that the document does not specify what that length is, what that distance is from the property boundary. And I think it would be worth it to be doing the research with the experts in the field to really talk about, you know, what sort of distances should we be looking at? Are we talking about 25 feet? Are we talking about 100 feet? And really look into the actual science behind this instead of making it an arbitrary prescription to remove branches and logs. So I think the other thing that's worth noting in this section, well, I'll leave it there because I want to maybe talk about restoration next and what that looks like. And I didn't put that on here, but I want to find out first if there's any discussion around the logs and branches portion, and if I have some direction to work on that section particularly.
Well, I would be inclined to remove logs right away because logs on the ground aren't really a fire hazard, but I would appreciate using a scientific approach where if you can find material that says that rather than just going by my the seat of my pants, then that would be the better way to approach that. My suspicion is you'll find that the logs on the ground are not really a fire hazard, and removing them might actually increase fire hazard by removing mulch that would keep moisture in the ground. So yes, definitely pursue that.
Okay. Yeah. I apologize. It looks like my computer may be slowing down, so hopefully that doesn't disturb things too much. Any other thoughts on this part and working this out, fleshing out the details of this a bit more?
Well, it may be, and then related to the distance idea, that you're not going to be able to eliminate all risks. If you take a look at the problem from that standpoint, then we'd end up clear cutting the Pioneer Park. So there certainly has to be a balance that's struck there, and definitely, I think most of us would be in favor of keeping that clearance distance as small as possible.
Elaine, I'd love to help you look into that if you want.
Okay, great. So the last piece, which I think maybe is a partner conversation to this one about removing logs and branches, is and also, so it ties in that portion as well as these neighbor partnerships that are proposed in this document, is whether we want to explore having a portion or a small part of this document that addresses if restoration practices, whether they be the planting or removal, invasive removal that the city is performing, either with contractors or in-house, whether we should be providing some guidelines around what that restoration within a certain distance from those boundaries should include, right? And one of the things I think about is, you know, although this has been our practice for many years, it's not formalized, I don't believe, in any document, which is that we don't plant conifers and trees right on property boundaries, right? We just generally don't. And I'm not gonna fool you and say that this is because of fire risk, but it's been more out of respect for our neighbors that they may not want a wall of trees right up against that property boundary. And instead what we tend to do is we tend to grade our plantings back from the property boundary. So lower shrubs, higher shrubs, and then we get into trees a little ways back. But we may want to memorialize that in some way and do the research with some of these fire experts on, you know, should we be looking at certain distances here? Should we be looking at certain species mixes or, you know, particularly ways that we undertake restoration when it's happening along a property boundary. And I think the fire management plan could be a really good place to have that documented. So I'd love to hear any other thoughts. It sounds like, Kim, I'm sure you have thoughts about this.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. I've been muting and unmuting myself, but then you start to talk about what I would mention. But you know, one restoration practice that comes to mind that is in our specifications with contractors is actually creating debris piles for invasive removal. And it raises the question of would we continue to create you know, debris piles of invasives versus removing debris off site. That, you know, we do that as a cost saving measure. And, you know, sometimes the piles just, you know, they dry up within that season and start to decompose pretty readily, but it could be a source. It could be something that would go up pretty quickly if you know.
And if it dries out, right? And I think that's a great question to, again, to do some research on, because I think, you know, maybe it's about putting those debris piles, they need to be a minimum distance away from boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really depends on the area, but you know,
yeah.
A lot of times those debris piles actually stay very wet, right? Because they're not necessarily made of woody material a lot of the time. They tend to be more herbaceous,
yeah.
You know, ivy, things like that. But I suppose if they're, you know, 100% blackberry, they could get quite dry. So I think that's a great thing to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what I was going to suggest? We have on our work plan for May 20th plant selection. Putting these two topics together would be really great. If you didn't report to us sooner, but the May 20th, I think dovetails really well with sort of bringing together all these thoughts on how to think about our reforestation plans.
I'm gonna stop sharing this if you're all okay with it. We can all look at each other. Yeah, I think I'm not looking at the work plan right now, but
it's scheduled for May 20th.
wanted to look at what else is on there. Yeah, I mean, you know, we could look at bringing back some potential revisions to this in general, that being one of them at the May meeting. Then that could be a, yeah, like you said, a good kind of overlap between those two topics. But so yeah, I mean, I think you know, those were the topics that really rose to my mind in reading this, and really thinking about what the where the gray areas are, where I, you know, would like more clarity on, you know, what the direction is for, you know, restoration and forest management in these areas. But I certainly would look to the trust for, you know, if there's interest in pursuing other mitigation strategies, or consulting with, you know, someone who does this professionally and wants to, you know, and wants to review this and make some recommendations to us. So I think it's just an open discussion about, you know, anything else that came to mind and anything else that you'd like staff to look into.
Thoughts, anybody? I had a couple of things on the staff report. In the plan review and update, I think it'd be really helpful to mention that since the plan was developed, we built a fire station adjacent to the northwest quadrant, because I think that big picture justifies why we're rethinking this, or tells us why we should think about things differently.
Just a question, a point of clarification. That was there before, wasn't it?
Correct.
I think it was there. It was just completely, yeah, it was just completely overhauled so that it felt completely new. But
yeah, I thought it was completely new. Okay, I stand corrected.
Well, it's funny that you said that, because I was like, no, I think it's in the original plan that, you know, that
there's a fire station there. Wow. Okay, I learned something.
You caught me for a moment.
I was wondering why you looked so perplexed.
I was processing.
And then on page 5, item 3, exhibit 1, maybe this is just my printer, but are those two columns supposed to represent positive and negatives? They seem to be sort of like, here's the good, here's the bad, but there's no header.
Oh, my apologies. So one of them should say, the one on the left should say safety factors, and the one on the right should say risk factors.
Okay.
So that may be something I just need to clarify in the final draft. Let me look at the clean draft here.
The clean is good.
Okay, clean's good. Yeah.
I was looking at the red line. Okay.
Yeah, the red lines, the colors are a bit funky on that. So, but yeah, so one is supposed to identify.
Oh yeah, there you go.
The good, and one's the.
Yeah. It's because it's white printing on black.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And there's one typo. Just
please.
In where it says plan review and updates, the plan, you have to insert the word has.
I'm sorry, can you give me a page number on it?
It's the cover, page 1, the section called plan review and updates.
Okay.
The plan has not.
Thank you.
And then I thought it might read a little tiny bit better under 23.3, the very last sentence, in which case providing a defensive line of fire crews to protect fire from, I think it's probably to protect against fire reaching homes.
Against, gotcha. Okay.
All right. Any other comments? Geraldine?
Yeah, so I just have a question for Elaine. When you started this presentation, you were describing how the fire department reviewed this. I wondered if you could describe how the fire department thinks about, you know, what level of risk they feel it is about a fire in Pioneer Park. I imagine they're mostly trained for house or, structural fires. And I wondered how our fire department is.
Well, so in my conversations with, I don't want to speak for them. I want to be really clear about that. This is my interpretation of what they said to me, but I would want them to speak for themselves. My general impression is that, this park is, it is some very large pieces of land, and there is certainly a fire risk involved. But it's also very unusual for what would be considered a wildland to be surrounded by both roads and hydrants.
Mhm.
And so, it's very difficult to compare this to something like a wildland out in the, the foothills or something like that, where there just isn't the access and there's not the water resources. So, some of the things that I heard from them that I think are worth noting is that, if there's a fire in Pioneer Park, if one starts in Pioneer Park, very likely we will get calls about it immediately. And we will, there are a lot of people in the park and a lot of eyes on things. And so response time could be pretty quick. We have a fire station across the street. That also said, they have, these, we are surrounded in our area by so many resources for helping with the response. While they could respond initially, the response times from our mutual aid agencies would be very quick. And those agencies are trained in wildland firefighting, and they can be here, in relatively short order. That includes not just the, East Side Fire and Rescue and those other organizations within the mutual aid agreement, but it also extends to DNR, should DNR resources be needed. And they, with their headquarters in Enumclaw and a lake full of unlimited water, that's also a resource that, not every community is afforded. Right. And so, I think those are just some high level things that I pulled out of that. I think it's good that they're very clear in this document that their priority is not to save the forest, right? That's not their priority. Their priority is life and property, and it's keeping it from spreading. And, they're very clear on that. So, they understand that if the forest caught fire, it would burn, and they would defend those boundaries. But we also have a lot of fire breaks built in naturally into this park, not just wood, but also trails, and that those are all assets to us.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Then I think we're ready to move on to the Angstrom open space title update.
Yeah. So, sorry, I want to look at my notes a little bit on this, but so I wanted to provide an update. Trustee Hildebrandt had brought up at I believe it was at the last meeting that that in looking at the King County Assessor site, that he noticed that the title for the piece of property, the Angstrom open space piece of property, is still in the city's name. So it's still, the title is still held by the city of Mercer Island. I did go back and look through some of the minutes from 2011, so 2010 and 2011, when this process was going on and this was going to council. And in fact, it was reported to the trust that that title had been transferred. So there's clearly a something disconnect that happened, essentially 10 years ago. So I did run this up the chain. I have spoken with leadership in the city, all the way up to the city manager about this, and and she recognizes the issue that is here, right? That this needs to be looked at and addressed. And she has committed to us doing a review of this, to what happened, and looking at a legal review of this. But unfortunately, the city's legal team is completely tied up right now in the Sound Transit lawsuit, and is pretty much completely unavailable for quite a while. And what she wanted to convey to the trust was that this is a priority, and this will go on our work plan for our legal team, but it's not going to happen right away. So I think what I want to say about it is that, you know, I'm committed to making sure that I keep you all in the loop about where that is and doing periodic updates with you. But I will say, to be honest about it, that I don't expect them to really get to anything substantial or anything that's really reportable until probably the end of this year. But, you know, I think it's great to have it on our plate and to have it on our work plan for this year. And I'll commit that we'll follow through on that review. So I wish I had more answers for you tonight. I do not.
Well, that's good. It was just a surprise to me to find that the property was still in the name of the city, since we've been treating it as if it was part of Pioneer Park.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting, Tom, and I think it's just worth noting that this, you know, there is no question that the management of the Angstrom Open Space is still very much under the purview of the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board, and there are no foreseeable changes to that. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we will continue to manage it as if it were a part of Pioneer Park, essentially. Same level of service, governed by all of the same documents. And you saw I included it in the new fire management plan. So, you know, I want you to rest assured that that doesn't reflect on any sort of practice changes, you know, realizing that the title hasn't been switched. So, yeah.
So Elaine, do you want to maybe adopt it into, well, we have nothing for our November 18th meeting. Do you want to put it in for November 18th?
I probably would prefer to put it in for the September meeting.
Okay.
Check in on it then.
Yeah, I would like for the city council to see that it's on our work plan.
And I think, you know, it is clear on there. So it's listed under this meeting, and there is a footnote there that says, you know, basically this is the discussion of the topic. So it is recorded there as a document, as a work plan item. So I don't know that we need to repeat it, although if you want me to formalize it as an update, I certainly can.
I sort of would like to tweak the council's memory that this is something.
Okay. All right. I am happy to update that. Does the rest of the trust, or is everyone good with that?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And it's not because I feel like it's got to be done by the end of the year, because I don't.
Right.
Well,
at least, I mean, I think it would serve as a really good reminder of just, you know, we need to make sure that you're getting updates on this regularly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Any other comments on Angstrom? Then I think that brings us to our quadrant reports. So shall I start with Northwest? Who's Northwest? Greg?
I have observation. There's a 20-inch tree across the Salmonberry Trail.
Oh boy. When was the last?
But the rest of the park looked great.
Okay.
But maybe Andy didn't get to that one yet. There's a lot of trails.
Yeah.
You said the Salmonberry Trail. Okay.
Yeah, it's like midway.
Okay.
Probably 300 feet from the.
Right. That might be one of the pictures I sent you, because one of them was Northwest,
Right.
which I will give my husband credit for, because he's the one who found that
I
one.
thought it was, yeah. I thought it was pretty big, and then my dog just jumped right on it and right over
Right.
it. Oh, okay, not so big.
My
And then
comment,
I saw a zoning notice for Pioneer Park.
really?
I saw a zoning notice for something going on in Pioneer Park right next to the subway business station about something about a rezone or something. So I have no idea what that's about.
You sure it didn't have to do with that shopping center?
Yeah, I don't know. It said Pioneer Park on it though, which I thought was very interesting.
You know what, Elaine, I can go over and take a picture of it for you tomorrow morning.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
send it to
Be
you.
happy to look into it.
And then the third thing is I've noticed periodically a gray pickup truck parked on Island Crest Way full of wood, like split wood, right at the top of that little hill next to the power pole. And it's always in the same spot, and it's there every couple of weeks. And I hope he's not harvesting wood out of the park. But I actually honestly just don't know what's up with that. So it's kind of an unusual spot.
And Craig, can you say where is this parked?
On Island Crest Way, on the east side of the road, at the top of the little the hill that goes up between the two quadrants. It's where it kind of flattens out on the top. There's a big, huge power pole there. He just parked nose in, and the rear end is just full of split wood.
You know what,
But
Craig, I've noticed it too, and it
Seen him
doesn't have,
there many times.
you've got a delay going on.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I've
Anyway,
seen it,
just curious. Sorry.
I saw it there too, and it didn't have like a wood for sale sign, so I'm equally confused about what it's doing.
Good to know. I will ask our Parks and Maintenance team that is out in that area very regularly to let me know when that's happening, and we can try and make contact.
Okay.
Also, I did notice that the grass along the roadway is kind of torn up. I don't know whether it's attributable only to that truck, but certainly driving off on a shoulder at this time of year isn't helping.
So I will say that yesterday I got a report from one of the parks maintenance staff that a school bus had pulled off on the east side of Island Crest Way into our gravel pullout. And it looks like maybe when they took off, they hit it at a weird angle and actually ended up sliding off into the lawn area and then got stuck. And had a really hard time getting out of there. I didn't hear what the resolution was. I assume they did get out of there without any major damage, but I know from the photos that the lawn was significantly damaged. So we'll be looking at some turf rehab in that area later this spring.
So I have one comment I'd like to interject. Thinking about the quadrant reports, that we don't have anyone in charge of actually walking through Angstrom open space. And I don't know if that loop has been incorporated into the northeast quadrant, or if you actually want to add it more formally, given that we've just been discussing the open.
Yeah.
Right,
I think it's been sort of implied.
I think so too. I mean, certainly when I was over in that quadrant, I mean, there's no boundary line that says you're now in Angstrom open space.
I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great, you know what? I think it's worth updating Northeast Angstrom
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that it's clear.
Right.
So I go on, also I share the Northwest with Craig, and I've been sending emails in reporting things as it goes. So
Thank you so much, Jerry.
plenty muddy in the last couple of weeks. Getting better now.
Okay, so we just did Northwest, so Northeast.
So I was down through there yesterday, and it's obviously been hit hard by the winds. You know, there's, when you first go in, boy, there's just a lot of stuff strewn all over. As you get deeper in, there's a place where, you know, there's a lot of pine that's just covering the path, so it's not easily visible, but it's obvious that, you know, there have been folks in there it looks as though trees have been removed from blocking the trail. But boy, there's a lot of, there must have been just tremendous amount of damage there. So, but I think that, you know, it's obvious that we're attempting to do some clearing, and, you know, I think, you know, it's just going to take a while. And then there are places that are kind of mucky in there too.
Yeah, and Andy did mention during our staff meeting this past week that, you know, this first round was just dealing with trees.
Yeah, it's up. Yeah, right.
And then he did mention that he needs to get back out to these trails with a blower and start, you know, just the rest of the organic matter off the trail. So it is on his radar that needs to happen.
Yeah, I just can't get over the size of some of those trees that are down. It's just, oh, it's sad.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, how predictable is that? I mean, when when a tree whose root ball is as tall as I am comes down, do we have any warning that is going to happen? Or is this really a product of how wet the soil is?
It's probably two separate issues. It could be one of two issues, I should say. When soils are this saturated, obviously we can lose whole root plates just because of saturation. That's a little bit rarer and usually is happening in areas like perched wetlands and things like that. And we do have some of that, especially in Angstrom. In Pioneer Park particularly, I suspect that a fair amount of it actually has to do with root rot. So, you know, you have trees that may have lost large structural roots because of root rot organisms. And it actually, and one of the primary issues with managing root rot is that it doesn't actually have any outward signs in the canopy. I mean, if you're looking very closely, maybe at the growth increments on the trees, and there's some very subtle things, but on a forest-wide basis, it's very difficult to know that something has lost maybe a main structural root and could eventually blow over. Now, these things would sort of naturally come down over time. You get 70-mile-an-hour gusts, and all of a sudden, you know, all of them at once. So I guess the short answer is no, they're not predictable. You know, this is what Andy does, right? He walks through the forest on our primary trails and also along our boundaries, you know, to try and foresee these things. But when there are no outward expressions of issues with roots, it's incredibly difficult to manage proactively. And I think that's just been an ongoing forest management struggle in this park.
Any other things to report in Northeast?
I've reported a big madrone that came down across one of the trails to Kim. I think it was even the day after the storm, and I imagine that, you know, Andy is fully aware of what's going on in there because of what a disaster zone it was. So I don't know that I have anything to add, but I thought that maybe the group would want to know that there was a pretty large madrone that came down. Just because
it's heartbreaking.
It really is. It was so sad. But
and I did report that to Andy.
Yeah. And you can tell, like, it was actually kind of a neat opportunity to be able to see all the problems that it had pathologically because it came down. So that did provide kind of a neat opportunity to see some of the symptoms of what we're experiencing region-wide with those trees. So thank you guys for taking care of all that.
Southeast? Who's on that with me?
It's me and
Yeah,
Carol
I
Ann,
thought
I
so.
believe.
Yeah.
Nothing much to report other than I think it looks like it's being taken care of.
Yeah, I sent a couple of pictures in yesterday, and it's like every place else. There's a lot of mess. Although I will say, I think people have been really good at, to the extent it's something that they're physically capable of moving off the trail. There's been a lot of moving off the trail, which is good to see. But man, some of that one area I sent you a picture of is just like a war zone.
Yeah.
It's a massive number of trees that came down, and I did see quite a few, you know, small trees like 3-2 inch that are just leaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where they're going to end up going. So
You don't like to see the young trees going.
Yeah.
yeah.
If we're done with quadrant reports, unless anyone has anything to add, I would like to do just a really quick interjection of a few updates for you all, partly about the storm, but partly about a few other issues. So if you're all okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should just take about less than 5 minutes. Part of it is about this, the storm cleanup. Just, you know, you all obviously were out and witnessed the immense amount of material that came down on the trail. But I asked Andy to provide me a little bit of a summary, and he says so far he's cleared 32 separate trail obstructions between the 3 quadrants and Angstrom. He has essentially done nothing else since last Wednesday. He did spend part of last Wednesday, as did the entire parks maintenance crew, assisting our road crews with clearing roads. Those are obviously the priority, and then moving on to parks afterwards. But once he started in Pioneer, he hasn't done anything else. And he put on there that there were approximately 23 hours of staff time so far, but I want to be really clear. That is not staff time. That's Andy time. This is one guy. And he's just been working a chainsaw. Like Kim said, he's really been prioritizing making the trails passable. There are a few areas where getting rid of the actual wood is going to take a lot more time. And in those cases, he's tried to provide some bypass routes so that people can still use the trails and get through. But he realized he understands how much work this represents to get things back to, you know, being in a good state. And I think it probably affected trail grade in a few places too. I know that he noted there was some root plate lifting that disturbed the trail grade that are going to require some more significant trail repairs later in the year, presumably once the crew gets on and he can start to tackle some of those. So I just want to give a major kudos, shout out to Andy for all of his work in the park, and really all of the crews that have just been working nonstop to deal with this and basically put everything else on hold on their work plans. So Andy gave me a few pictures there, but he's got a whole file folder of like so many pictures of trail clearances. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that if you're looking closely at my screen, you probably see that my title has changed since our last meeting. So I wanted to just call out that I have moved into a new position with the city in the Public Works Department. I'm now the Deputy Director of Public Works for Operations, specifically that side of the house. So overseeing the operations includes not only parks and natural resources, but also our water and our right-of-way and stormwater section, and a new branch of operations, which is our support services. So facilities management for the city. And it's terrific. I'm very excited.
Good.
But this obviously means that there is a staffing hole, shall we call it. When Jason and I presented to you all about the upcoming reorganization of Public Works and what it looked like, I think everyone was pretty clear that we were going to have a bunch of open positions and there were going to be some transitions within the organization. And this is a pretty major one because the parks operations team now have essentially 3 vacancies on it. the Parks Operations Manager, which is currently in recruitment right now. So we're hoping to get that position filled pretty soon. And then after that position is filled, we'll be looking at filling the Parks Foreman position. And this is more of overseeing the parks maintenance crew. So really helping with that side of the house. And then one of our parks maintenance team members. So I would imagine that the next question that I would receive is, are you going to still do these meetings, right? Are you staff liaison? So I will be at least for a little while. I would like to, the idea right now is that eventually this will transition to whoever fills the Parks Operations Manager role. But that will not happen overnight, and I will not just quickly hand off the baton, but I imagine that this will be sort of a slow transition, because I want to make sure that we're following through on everything, you know, that we've committed to, and that person feels really well equipped to, you know, be up to date with anything that you need answers for. So I just wanted to bring you all up to speed on that. That's about that.
So I think that deserves congratulations to you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think it's
Congratulations.
telling.
Mic drop.
Parks Department taking over Public Works in its entirety. I don't know.
Exactly. Pretty soon we'll rename Public Works to Parks and Rec.
Don't tell the engineers.
Right. But please also tell Andy, I know, we've all been out there. We know what he's been up to. So we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And look forward to him having somebody to help him. Because I know a lot of that doesn't look to me like a one-person job.
Yeah, and it looks heavy, heavy, heavy.
Mhm.
I asked him today how his body was doing, and he said, the first couple of days I was pretty sore, but now I feel really strong again. He said, this is one heck of a workout. So he's
Good.
different, it's a change of pace, I guess you could say. So yeah. And that's it from me on city updates, unless there are any other questions.
Anything more from anybody? Would somebody like to make a move that we adjourn?
So move we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
I assume it's a unanimous consent. Thank you. Oh, Tom, did you have something to say?
No, that was voting in favor of
Oh,
adjournment.
good. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye, guys.